Welcome back to Bookish Dives, everyone. You know how we do things around here. We grab a really fascinating book, we totally immerse ourselves in it, and we pluck out all those shiny, insightful gems for you.
Yeah, we've done a couple of these deep dives already, right? And today, we're going to take on a collection of short stories, The Thing Around Your Neck by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Oh, this collection is absolutely brilliant. It's such a vibrant and multifaceted look at Nigerian life, both for people who've stayed in Nigeria and for those who ventured out and moved abroad. And what's really fascinating is how Adichie weaves together these themes of identity, displacement, family, and these cultural clashes that happen when worlds collide. It's really insightful. Definitely. And today, in our deep dive, we're going to try to give you, the listener, a real grasp of the essence of these stories, kind of highlight those subtle but really important cultural nuances Adichie portrays so well, and hey, maybe even inspire you to check out the collection for yourself. So let's get started with the first story, Cell 1. We meet Namabia, a university student. What kind of sets off the events in this story?
Well, Namabia finds himself in a tricky situation. He's been out drinking, and it just so happens to be a night when, there's a bunch of cult violence erupting on campus, chaos everywhere. And somehow he ends up getting arrested.
And once he's in jail, it seems like his whole perception of things gets turned upside down, right?
Right.
Definitely not what he expected.
It's totally eye-opening for him. One of the first things that really shakes him is seeing this notorious cult member, a guy everyone fears, rumored to be super violent, just break down sobbing after the chief hits him. It shatters that image of these cult figures as these untouchable, almost mythical beings, shows their vulnerability,
Yeah, that moment when the mask drops and you see the real person underneath, and then there's that disturbing incident with Cell 1.
Oh, yeah. Just a few days into his detention, they pull this really grim stunt. They bring a dead body out from this, ominous Cell 1 and just lay it out in front of the Namabia cell. It's a brutal, very direct message. This is what can happen to you, a raw display of power.
Yeah, it really shows those power dynamics at play. And one thing I found interesting is how this whole experience seems to change his parents' behavior. They kind of shift, right?
This is so key. Namabia's parents are normally quite vocal about police corruption. His father is known for going on these long rants, and his mother, mutters about the broader social problems the police represent. But when they visit him, especially passing through those police checkpoints, they both go completely silent. They just instinctively know any criticism could jeopardize Namabia's release. That silence speaks volumes about the fear, the repercussions of speaking out against authority.
This strategic silence born out of fear. And then there's this almost disturbing sense of relief when another cult attack happens on campus. Why would that be?
Because suddenly the police have another narrative for Namabia's arrest. They can't definitively say they've rounded up all the cult members, right? Even his mother explicitly says, the police can no longer say they have everyone. It's this dark irony where more violence actually helps Namabia's case.
A chilling irony, for sure. So how does Namabia finally get out of this mess?
It's an informer, another one of those arrested cult members who insists Namabia is innocent, and just like that, he's released, along with the barman who was also caught up in the whole thing.
You'd think after all that he'd have these dramatic stories, right? But it seems like he downplays the whole experience. Why do you think that is?
Exactly. He gives this very understated account of his time locked up, and he completely leaves out any details about those horrific things he witnessed in Cell 1 or the new site. His sister thinks it's a place where people disappear. Even though he's a charismatic guy, a good storyteller, he doesn't go into it. It's that silence, it suggests maybe trauma and inability to articulate what he went through, or even fear of what might happen if he speaks too much. So we're left with these unseen scars.
It really makes you wonder about the impact, for sure. Okay, let's move on to imitation. This time we meet Nikem, a Nigerian woman living in America. What's her situation when the story begins?
Well, Nkem's life in America gets completely disrupted by this phone call from her friend Igamaka back in Lagos. It's a gossip session, basically. And Ingem finds out that her husband, Obiora, who's rich, has a young girlfriend. And get this, the girlfriend seems to have moved into their house in Lagos, driving his cars. It also touches upon this cultural context, where marrying a rich man often comes with these unspoken expectations, like a certain level of tolerance for infidelity.
Ijimaka certainly doesn't hold back on those details, but what's interesting is Nenkem's outward reaction. She puts on this facade of being okay. What do you make of that?
It's fascinating. She gets this earth-shattering news, but she casually promises to visit Ijimaka in New Jersey a promise we as readers kind of doubt she'll keep. And there's this image of untouched glass of water beside her. It symbolizes that inner turmoil, like she can't even process what she's just heard. It's a picture of composure on the outside, but inside she's reeling.
Yeah, that quiet shock before the storm. Now, there's this Benin mask in their living room. It seems pretty important in the story.
That Benin mask, which Obiora admits is a copy, becomes this focal point for these discussions about cultural heritage and the impact of colonialism. He's passionate about explaining how the British looted the original masks during this expedition in 1897 and how these acts of theft are often dressed up in Western history as these, expeditions or acts of pacification. He connects it to the issue of Western museums displaying these stolen artifacts as trophies, while the cultures they were taken from are denied their own history. The mask, even as a replica, becomes a symbol of this cultural dispossession.
So even as a fake, it sparks these really important conversations. And even with all this tension in their marriage, Nkem still looks forward to Obiora's visits to the U.S. Why is that?
Yeah, she anticipates the art he brings, the Nok terracotta, for instance, and the stories he tells about their history and cultural meaning. Sometimes she even questions how accurate he is, but she loves his passion for it. It's like he's bringing a piece of their shared heritage into their American home. It's a connection to her roots,
Yeah.
despite the distance and the problems in their marriage.
It's like a bridge to their past amidst the current troubles. Now, Nauha observes American culture through her neighbors and a delivery man. What are her impressions?
At first, she notices their helpfulness, how polite they are, but she also sees what Obiora calls their plastic lives. Maybe a sense of superficiality. What really strikes her, though, is what she calls an abundance of unreasonable hope in their outlook. It's so different from what might be a more pragmatic, even cynical Nigerian perspective shaped by different realities.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point about those contrasting views on optimism. So Obiora's visit is approaching, and Nakim starts thinking about changing her appearance for him, but then she has a sudden change of heart. What's going on there?
She's thinking about getting a hair relaxer, styling her hair in a way she thinks he likes. She even considers waxing. But then, almost out of the blue, she cuts her hair really short. It's a powerful statement, maybe a rebellion against his expectations or a way of reclaiming her own identity in the face of his infidelity, like a visual representation of an internal shift.
Definitely feels like a quiet act of defiance. She also has this conversation with Amaichi, her housegirl back in Lagos, about Obiora's cheating. What's Amaichi's take on it all?
Amaichi is, well, very practical. She acknowledges that Nunkem probably knows about the other women, even if she doesn't confront him or ask. Amaichi's point is that sometimes it's better not to know everything. And she says that despite his flaws, Obiora is a good man who loves Nenkem in his own way. She even hints that Nenkem's friend Ejimaka might be jealous, stirring the pot. It's a perspective rooted in a different cultural understanding of marriage, like what's acceptable, what's not.
Different cultural lenses shaping how we see these things. We also get glimpses into Nkem's own past relationships in Lagos. Why do you think Adichie includes those memories?
Those flashbacks are crucial. They give us context for Nunkem's current situation. She remembers dating married men before Obiora, something that was pretty common for single women in Lagos, often driven by societal pressures and the need for financial stability. She even considered being a fourth wife at one point to help her family. These memories reveal the compromises she's made, the realities she's faced. They shed light on why she might be accepting, or at least not immediately reacting to, Obiora's infidelity.
How past experiences and societal norms can shape our choices and tolerance levels. The story wraps up with Obiora arriving in America. What happens in that initial encounter?
Obiora's first comment is about her haircut. Seems casual, but it's loaded, right? Especially since she was planning to style it differently for him. Nkem's decision about their future isn't explicitly stated, but the ending suggests this quiet determination, a shift in her understanding of their relationship. Like she's reached a turning point, but we're left to imagine what she'll do.
That quiet resolve leaves us wondering, okay, a private experience. Now, this story is set against this backdrop of really intense social violence. What's the situation?
We're in Kano during a violent riot. Chika, an Igbo Christian woman, is visiting the city and finds herself trapped, desperately seeking refuge in an abandoned store. And in this chaotic moment, she encounters a Hausa Muslim woman, also escaping the violence.
And their very first interaction tells us so much about them, doesn't it? It highlights those differences in background.
Totally. The house woman is worried about her lost necklace, something probably simple but personally meaningful. Chika, on the other hand, is more concerned about her dropped Burberry handbag and her oranges. It's subtle, But those details, what they value, what they've lost, immediately tell us about their different social statuses, their possible religious identities, without explicitly saying it.
And then we find out the reason behind this sudden riot, which emphasizes those deep religious tensions that exist. What's the cause?
Later, taking shelter in the store, they hear that the riot erupted because of a rumor. An Igbo Christian man supposedly desecrated the Holy Quran at the motor park. It shows how volatile things are, how quickly religious and ethnic differences can escalate into violence in this part of Nigeria.
So inside the store, you have these two women from different backgrounds, and there's this unspoken truce between them. How does Adichie portray their awareness of those differences, even though they're both vulnerable in that moment?
Even though they're both facing danger and need safety, their awareness of being Igbo and Hausa, Christian and Muslim, is always there, simmering beneath the surface. There's no big declaration of unity, no effort to overcome their differences. Instead, it's the small gestures, the silences, that underlying tension that speaks volumes. They are connected by their shared humanity, but divided by the realities of their society.
We see this really clearly during the Hausa woman's private prayer. What's Chika's reaction?
The Hausa woman prays, a very personal act of faith. Chika, who's Christian but admits she doesn't fully understand God, feels excluded. It's a powerful image. Even in shared adversity, those deeply held beliefs can separate them. It's both a reminder of their common humanity and the divides that exist.
Then later, when the riot seems to have calmed down a bit, Chika offers to help the woman get home. But there's a hesitation there. What do you think is behind that?
It's the danger, right? The riot's still going on, and who knows what could happen. Being seen with Chika, an Igbo Christian, could put the Hausa woman at risk. Trust is fragile in this environment, and old prejudices can easily resurface. It's a reminder of those deep divisions.
And Chika experiences that danger firsthand when she leaves the store. What does she encounter?
Yeah, she stumbles upon a burned body, the smell, the sight. It's horrific, and she runs back to the store. It's a harsh reality check. The danger is real, and they're not truly safe.
But amidst all this fear, there's a moment of shared experience, right? A moment of connection between them.
Yes, the Hausa woman gets a bad stomach. And despite everything, Chika comforts her, gives her water. It's a simple act of kindness, But in that shared vulnerability, they form a bond. It's a reminder that we're all human, even when surrounded by so much division.
Human connection in the midst of chaos. Later, Chika reads news reports about the violence, and it's referred to as the history of violence. How does that official narrative contrast with her own experience?
The news talks about these broad groups, reactionary Hausa-speaking Muslims and non-Muslims. It's so impersonal, so detached. It's a stark contrast to her memory of the Hausa woman's gentleness, their shared humanity. It shows how those big narratives can fail to capture the complexities of individual experiences.
The limits of how we categorize and label events. So the story ends with them leaving the store, and Chika thinks about returning to her aunt's house. What do you think is the lasting impact of this intense, private experience on her?
Even though it was terrifying, she leaves with this memory of connection, of finding humanity in a person from a completely different background in the middle of a riot. It transcends the ethnic and religious divisions that fueled the violence. It suggests that human connection is possible, even in the most fractured societies. It's a private experience that changes how she understands identity and relationships.
Really powerful. Okay, ghosts. This story brings together two old friends years after a major historical event. What's the context?
Ghosts reunites the narrator with his old friend Ikenna years after the Biafran War. It's a meeting full of shared history, the trauma of war, and the passage of time. Like you can feel the weight of the past hanging over them.
And the narrator is totally thrown off guard to see Ikenna alive. Why was he so surprised?
So back in 1967, during the evacuation of Nusuka, when federal troops were advancing, he and his family saw Ikenna driving back onto the university campus. It seemed reckless, like he was going back for something important, maybe manuscripts or belongings. Later, they heard 2 lecturers had been killed when Nusuka fell, and they just assumed Ikenna was one of them. To see him decades later is like seeing a ghost from a traumatic past.
It's like the past literally coming back to life. Their conversation naturally goes back to those war experiences. What kind of memories do they share?
They talk about the destruction in Nusuka, about Christopher Okigbo, the poet, who died in the war. And there's this story about a wounded Biafran soldier they gave a ride to in their car. His bloodstains, a very real reminder of the human cost of the conflict. These memories show how deeply the war impacted them.
And then the narrator says something unusual about his deceased wife, Iber. How does Ikenna react?
The narrator mentions that Ibir visits him after her death. Akena at first thinks he means she visited America, where their daughter lives now. But when he clarifies that it's more as a, spectral visit, Akena gets uncomfortable. Like, he's trying to be polite, but you can tell he thinks it's a bit, well, strange. It shows the difference in their beliefs, how they deal with loss.
Two different perspectives on grief and the possibility of something beyond. They also talk about what's become of the university where they used to work. What issues do they discuss?
They're both saddened by the decline. They talk about student corruption, how the students aren't intellectually engaged anymore. They even talk about lecturers manipulating their birth dates to avoid retirement. It's a commentary on how things have changed, the disillusionment in post-war Nigeria.
And then there's this moment of suspicion when Ikena mentions fake drugs. Why does that bother the narrator?
The narrator's wife, Ibir, had died after being sick for a long time, and her medication hadn't seemed to work. He suspects fake drugs played a role in her death. So when Ikena casually brings it up, it's like a punch to the gut. He wonders, is it just a coincidence? Or is Ikena trying to get him to talk about Ibir, about his maybe unconventional beliefs? There's this unspoken grief and suspicion.
It's a heavy moment. The story ends with the narrator watching Ikena leave, reflecting on their past and their very different present lives. What's the overall feeling at the end?
It's melancholy, a sense of loss. He thinks about the lives they might have had if the war hadn't happened, the realities they've faced since. He sees the distance that's grown between them, distance created by time, by loss, by different ways of seeing the world. He probably knows he won't see Ikena again, and that adds to the feeling of loss.
It really captures that sense of time, memory, and the scars of war. Let's shift gears now and talk about the shivering. This one takes us to Princeton, New Jersey. We meet Ukamaka. What's her situation at the start?
Ukamaka is a nervous wreck. She's glued to the news, totally anxious about this plane crash in Nigeria. Her ex-boyfriend, Udena, might have been on that flight, and she's frantically refreshing websites, trying to get information.
And then Chinedu, another Nigerian living in the U.S., shows up. How does that play out, with all the tension in the air?
Chinedu's arrival is a surprise. At first, Ukamaka isn't sure if she wants company while she's dealing with all this anxiety, but his presence, as another Nigerian who gets the cultural context, who understands the potential tragedy, is oddly comforting. They talk about the crash, about Nigerian things, finding common ground in their shared heritage, even though they're in this foreign place.
And in the midst of all this, we learn about Ukamaka's breakup with Udena. What happened there?
Udena ended their 3-year relationship quite suddenly. He said it had become staid, even though she was making plans for their future. No one else was involved. It was more like he felt the spark was gone. It left her blindsided.
A sudden and confusing end. We also see Ukamaka seeking guidance from Father Patrick. What does he tell her?
She tells him how life doesn't make sense. He initially says to have faith, which doesn't really help in that moment of raw anxiety. But then he says something that resonates. Faith is about accepting life's imperfections and anxieties, not demanding a perfect, understandable reality. It's a new way for her to think about coping with the unknown.
And how does her friendship with Chinedu develop from there? What do they do together, and do any differences in their views come up?
They start going to church together on Sundays and grocery shopping during the week. Chinedu's more frugal, always looking for sales. He questions her need for organic food, sees it as a pretentious American thing. It's subtle, but it shows their different experiences, their perspectives on American consumerism.
Those little things that reveal bigger differences. And how does Chinedu's anxiety about the crash unfold as more information comes out? What's the eventual news?
The worst is confirmed. There are no survivors. Chinedu is devastated. He talks about corruption, safety issues in Nigeria. He's visibly distressed. It's heartbreaking.
And we also learn that Chinedu has his own struggles in America, right? What's happening with him?
Yeah, he's facing some serious legal trouble. It could lead to deportation. It adds another layer of anxiety to everything else that's going on.
And Ukamaka offers him support. The story ends with them at her Catholic church. What's the meaning behind that, considering everything they're going through?
Chinedu isn't really into Catholicism, but he goes with her. Earlier, when he had prayed, she had felt this weird shivering sensation. By sharing that very personal experience, she connects with him, shows him she understands, They find solace together, even though their beliefs are different. It hints at a bond forming through their shared vulnerability and loss.
Connection in the face of uncertainty. Really moving. Okay, last story. The arrangers of marriage. We meet Shanice arriving in America for, an arranged marriage. What are her first impressions of her new life?
Flatbush, New York isn't exactly the picture-perfect America she probably imagined from movies. Instead of a big house with a driveway, she's in a modest kind of rundown apartment building. Even the smells are different, not as glamorous as she might have thought. Reality hits, and it's different.
And the customs officer at the airport doesn't exactly make her feel welcome either, right?
No, he's suspicious, goes through her things, especially the food. He even confiscates her uziza seeds,
Hmm.
an ingredient in Nigerian cooking, thinks she'll try to grow them illegally or something. It's this tiny thing, but it highlights those cultural misunderstandings, the anxieties immigrants face, a sign of the adjustments she has to make.
Those little things that can be so jarring. And her first night the next morning with Ophidial, her new husband, isn't exactly what she might have hoped for in a marriage.
The first night, all she hears is his loud snoring, creates this distance between them. In the morning, intimacy feels rushed, impersonal. She's even put off by his morning breath. It's not exactly a warm, connected start.
Not the most romantic beginning, and the phone call with her aunt and uncle back in Nigeria shows how far apart she is from her old life. How's that conversation?
They're so excited that she married a doctor in America. It's a big status symbol back home. But the conversation is all about that. They don't really ask her how she feels. It shows how, for them, the marriage was maybe more about social status than her happiness or connection with Ophidial.
Status over personal happiness. Now, Ophidial is adamant about using his English name Dave and wants her to use Agatha Bell. What does that say about his desire to fit in?
It shows how much he wants to assimilate. He thinks these names are his ticket to success, to acceptance in America. He dismisses her connection to her Igbo name, sees it as unimportant. It highlights this tension between his desire to blend in and her sense of cultural identity.
Two different approaches to adapting to a new culture, and their grocery shopping trip also reveals some differences between them. What happens there?
At the store, she naturally reaches for familiar Nigerian biscuit brands, something comforting from home. But he steers her towards the cheaper store brands. Got to save money, be practical in America. He even criticizes Nigerian food, saying it's not as healthy as American food. It's another subtle judgment of her culture.
And even buying a winter coat turns into this clash of perspectives. How so?
He buys her this big practical coat that's on sale. It's winter in New York, got to be prepared, got to save money. But she sees it as another instance where practicality trumps everything else. The coat symbolizes this pragmatic, maybe even harsh life he envisions, which might not be what she had in mind.
The coat as a symbol of their differing expectations. And then the encounter with Shirley, their neighbor, makes her feel even more out of place. What happens?
Shirley's playing loud music, asking these intrusive, kind of insensitive questions. Ophidial is trying so hard to impress her and gives this simplistic explanation of Nigerian culture. It all leaves Chanirza feeling like an outsider, misunderstood. Ophidial's trying to fit in, but it's at the expense of her cultural background.
Trying to fit in, but maybe losing something in the process. The story ends with China's Eye feeling really isolated in America. What's the overall impression of her initial experiences?
Alienation. It's a big contrast between the romanticized image she might have had of America and the reality of this arranged marriage, this new life. She's homesick, questioning everything.
A harsh reality check. Okay, so these stories and the thing around your neck touch on so many profound themes, don't they? What would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Throughout these stories, Adichie shows us the complexities of identity in this globalized world. We see the struggle between holding on to your heritage and the pressure to assimilate, that push and pull of belonging and staying true to yourself. Family is a constant theme too, those bonds, even when they're strained by distance or difficult situations. And maybe most importantly, Adichie shows how big political and social realities, corruption, historical legacies, cultural misunderstandings impact people's lives and choices in such personal ways. As we've gone through these stories, was there anything that particularly surprised you, something thought-provoking that stood out for you?
What struck me was how power dynamics play out even in personal relationships. Whether it's the police in Cell 1, the economic differences in imitation, or the cultural dynamics in The Arrangers of Marriage, Adichie shows how these unseen forces shape people's experiences, and there's this quiet resilience in these characters as they navigate these new, sometimes hostile, cultural landscapes.
For our listeners who are always eager to learn and understand the world better, why are these stories relevant? Why should they care?
These stories give us a window into other people's experiences, especially those dealing with cultural transitions, displacement, and figuring out their identity in a diverse world. It's about empathy. Understanding different perspectives is not just about one culture or region, it's about being human in an increasingly complex world. Beautifully put. So if our deep dive into The Thing Around Your Neck has intrigued you, we urge you to check out the full collection and experience Adichie's incredible storytelling. Think about how these stories connect to your own understanding of home, identity, and the challenges and rewards of crossing cultures in our world.
And remember, Booky Shives will be back with more explorations of fascinating books, pulling out those valuable insights for you. We want to make staying well-informed, enjoyable, and accessible.
And as a final thought to ponder, think about this. In a world where we're more connected than ever before, what does it truly mean to find your place, to belong? And how can we bridge those cultural gaps that can feel so wide? Something to think about. And for more daily book summaries and deep dives like this, make sure to follow us.